Breaking news into CNN, a court decision now injecting even more whiplash into President Donald Trump's trade war. A federal appeals court has paused last night's ruling from the Court of International Trade that blocked President Trump's tariffs. Joining us now to discuss is Joe Weisenthal. He's the co-host of Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast. Joe, thanks for being with us. What do we know about this appeals court decision?
It's just incredible. It's funny because with every headline that comes out about the tariffs, the degree to which people take them, any of them seriously, continues to decline. But essentially, you know, the Congress allowed the White House years ago to unilaterally impose tariffs in emergency situations. Trump did that. An appeals court came out last night and said, this is not what was allowed under that law. This is not a proper separation of powers. And now we have another court saying, no, actually, it's fine. So the ongoing limbo continues.
So essentially they're saying it's fine for now, right, until this appeal plays out in court. Does that mean that, you know, these tariffs are now immediately back on?
Yeah, and apparently even with last night's, there was some sort of 10-day pause. So my read of the situation is that they are back on, and then the process will continue to play in court. With all of these things, with all of these other issues that you're talking about, everyone expects that these will eventually get resolved in the Supreme Court somehow. But I think both in the market and for businesses, now the expectation is that whatever the rules are today, they're probably going to be somewhat different a week or a day or a month from now.
So what does that do for business, and what does it do for consumers?
Yeah, it's not great. I mean, look, Trump has already pulled back from the most extreme version of the tariffs that were announced on April 2nd. We've seen this recovery in various sentiment surveys that have emerged in the last week. There is this rebound, but on the other hand, you said it exactly, you know, in a period of uncertainty, that's never good for capital, that's never good for adding headcount, et cetera. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit in the hard data. We've seen initial claims, continuing jobless claims, both creep up. We've seen factory orders slow down. So has the economy fallen off a cliff? No. Has the stock market crash recovered? Yes, but at the margin, all of these things have a decelerating effect.
Now, fundamentally, the administration is arguing that there is a crisis in international trade, and the president is trying to address that through these tariffs. What do you make of that argument? Because overall, the U.S. economy seems to be doing okay.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think very few people would look at the current environment and say there is an acute economic crisis, the likes of which Congress would have imagined when it delegated this essentially unilateral fiscal authority to the White House. Now, people may zoom out and look at the big picture, and they might say, okay, there's the declining manufacturing capacity of various key goods happening in the United States. This is a multi-decade story, et cetera. And I think someone could even make the case that there are conditions with regards to international trade that amount to a very serious issue for the United States. But is it the type of crisis in which, you know, other tariffs, such as those applied during the Trump administration, came after an investigative process, identifying what were perceived to be unfair trade practices? Is this the type of crisis that would justify, no, we can't even go through that process? I think people are skeptical that it's that type of crisis, and perhaps that's why, you know, the administration was dealt that setback, which has since been reversed in the court last night.
And then sort of put on hold again after that. I do wonder, as you're sitting back looking at all of this, if you think that the administration has avenues beside the emergency powers to try to gain the leverage that it's looking for to negotiate some of these trade deals, because they seem to have options. I wonder how far they can go.
Well, look, they did tariffs in the initial Trump administration that survived court battles, but it was a slower process. There was an investigation that took place. It was more about specific areas in which perceived unfair trading practices on the part of our partners were argued to have taken place. And I get the impression that courts will give the White House quite a bit of flexibility down that route, where you establish that one way or another, whether we're talking about dumping of various high-tech things, whether we're talking about, you know, certain things where a country is protecting its agriculture industry at the expense of American farmers. There is a process through which I think the White House can prosecute a trade war in such a way that would be permitted by the courts. Again, all of this could be permitted by the Supreme Court in the end, and that's what everyone is wondering about, whether the heavily Republican-appointed Supreme Court will side with the White House. I don't think it's that obvious which way the Supreme Court would go on some of these questions, but it's very likely that there is a route via which the White House could, put tariffs on more goods or more countries or more partners, et cetera, in a way that the courts would be chill with, just not in this way that everybody gets the 10% blanket tariff under the guise of an acute emergency.
Joe Weisenthal, appreciate you navigating these twists and turns with us.
Thanks for having me.
First, we're going to start with CNN's Phil Mattingly and Jeff Zeleny. Phil, I want to start with you just to take us through the economic implications of what has played out today. And if you could especially help us understand this latest ruling, how it interacts with the previous two, and where this all actually stands right now.
Yeah, Casey, how many times over the course of the last couple of months have you and I spoken about kind of the pervasive sense of uncertainty that's led to a level of paralysis throughout markets for business owners, for foreign leaders as well? Yet the last 21 hours haven't helped on that front. It's been slightly discombobulating. So I'll do my best to give you a Cliff's Notes version of things, which is basically where we stand right now is the cornerstone of President Trump's expansive tariff regime is alive. It's alive because of an administrative stay put on by a U.S. Circuit Court. That isn't a ruling on the merits. What it allows for is both sides to make their arguments about the necessity of an appeal. That appeals process, or that process of the stay, will play out through a briefing schedule that goes until June 9th. We will see kind of where things land from there. As you noted, the administration moved extremely fast to try and appeal what happened last night, which was essentially a court ruling to strike down the vast majority, really the most sweeping and expansive tariffs that President Trump has rolled out over the course of his first 5 months inside the administration. It was a direct shot to the executive authority the president has made clear he believes he has, but it also throws a very clear wrench into ongoing bilateral negotiations he's had with 18 allies over the course of the last several months. So where do things stand now? There's a wrinkle here. There's actually, as you noted, a second judge, a district court judge, who earlier today also found that the president didn't have the authority to impose these sweeping tariffs on an emergency basis. That ruling, however, applied to just two companies and the administration's ability to charge those two companies those tariffs. It was not expansive. It was not a nationwide injunction. The judge also gave 14 days for that ruling to come into place. That would give the administration time to appeal, as they've done with the ruling last night as well. So we'll have to keep an eye on that one. But for now, the most expansive ruling and the biggest threat that we've seen really at all to the president's tariff regime and his view of his expansive executive authority is frozen for the moment as the administration continues to pursue its urgent efforts to try and keep them in place.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Jeff Zeleny, help us understand how the White House is taking all of this in. And of course, President Trump is supportive of the tariffs. We showed you, why and how he has been throughout his entire political career. However, there are competing forces advising him right now. We've already heard from Peter Navarro on this, but of course, the market's really looking to Scott Bessent as someone that they want guidance on. Can you take us behind the scenes and help us understand how this is playing out?
Well, look, to Phil's point, they're frozen for a moment. That is the most important thing here because, yes, that ruling last night, which really was jarring, of all the legal rulings the White House has had to contend with, and there have been a lot of them, this was the most jarring because it hits directly at the heart of the administration's agenda. So that, for now, is on hold. But also, as Phil said, the merits have yet to be decided. So that is where this fight is going to play out. If you think about it like this, yes, the president, as you play there, has long believed in the idea of tariffs. It has been a consistency, one of the few consistent policy views. However, many observers thought at the very beginning of this administration he was kind of doing an end run around this by using the Emergency Powers Act of 1977 to impose these. Well, that is now at issue. The court last night, the International Trade Court, ruled that he does not have the power. The White House does not have the authority under that act. So they also ruled that the White House cannot subvert Congress. So those challenges still remain. So the bottom line now is, for all of the huffing and puffing from the White House podium, from advisors, this is now a legal case. The arguments have to be made in a court of law. And yes, this could still end up at the Supreme Court. It likely will end up at the Supreme Court. The advisors I've talked to just in this short period of time as we've been digesting this have said, but the at the heart of all of this is more than the president's longstanding view on tariffs. It's the method in which he has enacted all of this. So, and we should also point out, even if the legal cases was not this complicated, the tariff case on their own has been so complicated. As Phil was just saying, every country trying to negotiate now, this essentially gives all of them a bit of time also to pause. So the tariff deals will not be negotiated most likely as this legal case is playing out. So yes, it buys the White House some time, but again, they have to hone their argument here about why he imposed this in the first place.
Yeah, for sure. All right, Jeff Zeleny, Phil Mattingly, thank you both very much. Always great to see both of you.